Tres años y reales Sleepover terror tales, V5. As a child, prior to our move to Texas, we resided in a house with an expansive backyard in Georgia, which made me feel like the most popular kid in class. Whenever the thought of playing outdoor games or sports crossed my mind, my backyard was the perfect destination, thanks to its expansive 2-acre space. The backyard was enveloped by woods on 3 sides. The yard was adorned with numerous trees, featuring a trampoline nestled in one corner, a hot tub for relaxation, a spacious detached 3-car garage, and an above-ground pool inviting for a refreshing dip. In a middle-class neighborhood, our backyard truly offered all the essentials one could desire. There was ample open grass to engage in any sports, soccer, baseball, football, you name it. We even engaged in hide-and-seek tag, or what we would refer to as manhunts. One Friday, when we were in about 6th grade, my friends and I decided to have a camp-out sleepover in my backyard. It was Mike, the other Mike, whom I'll refer to as Michael, and Jason. We all needed to secure our parents' permissions, naturally, but we were around 11 or 12 years old, and it was a Friday. All of our parents were completely on board. Additionally, my family possesses a wealth of camping gear, featuring 2 spacious tents that could comfortably accommodate 2 of us in each. Once we received the green light from our parents, we organized for them to arrive at my house by 5, allowing us to enjoy some sports in the backyard. In the yard, we set up 2 mini soccer nets for our spirited 2-on-2 matches. We spent about 30 minutes on that. After that, we continued to play baseball for perhaps another 30 minutes. After sitting around for a few minutes to regain our energy, my parents ordered pizza for us, and we ended up eating around 6:30 or 7, if I had to guess. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, signaling that it was time to set up the tents before darkness enveloped the landscape. I had a knack for setting up tents, thanks to my time as a Boy Scout, where we had just recently learned the art of tent assembly. My friends offered some assistance, but I handled the majority of the tasks myself. When they finished, it was quite dark outside. The backyard lights illuminated the space, casting a warm and inviting glow. It was now dark enough for us to engage in our favorite game, Manhunt. Countless places to conceal oneself existed in the backyard. We engaged in pairs. Initially, it was Mike and me in hiding, while Michael and Jason took on the role of hunters. Mike and I have parted ways. Our objective was to return to the starting point, which was the back entrance of the house. Camping by the door was prohibited. The trampoline sat in a distant corner of the yard, just before the woods. I crept beneath that to conceal myself. As the hunters prepared to begin their search, they would blow a whistle to signal the hiders that the game was underway. Once I heard the whistle, I remained beneath the trampoline, waiting it out, observing the 2 of them in the distance as they scanned their surroundings. I lingered, biding my time for the perfect opportunity to inch nearer to the back door. I focused my attention on the hot tub, conveniently located next to the house. If I could manage to slip over and conceal myself behind the hot tub, could we make a beeline straight to the back door? As Michael and Jason turned their backs to me, engrossed in their exploration of the backyard, I seized the moment. I dashed toward the hot tub, and just as I reached its rear and crouched low, I heard one of the trash bins on the side of the house nearly topple over, and then I noticed the motion-detecting light on that side flicker to life. The hot tub was situated in that corner of the house, yet that light wouldn't have been triggered. I ventured a peek around the corner into the side yard, and there I spotted a tall figure clad in dark attire, briskly making their way toward the woods. Stepping into the forest, it wasn't my father. I hurried to my friends and called off the game, then went to inform my dad about it. We stepped outside and surveyed the woods for a few moments, then turned our attention to the street to spot any unusual vehicles. Empty and void. He mentioned that we ought to stay indoors tonight, which clearly disappointed us. We stepped inside and engaged in a game on my PlayStation. I once more recounted to my friends what I had witnessed, a tall figure strolling into the woods beside the house, seemingly having nearly toppled one of our trash bins. We discussed the idea of heading back outside and resting in the tent since it was already set up, after all. Additionally, or the chances that whoever it was remained out there hours later. Once we completed our game, we quietly stepped outside to avoid waking my dad. We weren't concealing our plans to return, yet we also had no intention of broadcasting them. Each of us had a sleeping bag. Mike and I had a tent to ourselves, while Michael and Jason occupied the other one. After a period of playful banter and shouting across the tents, we gradually settled down and attempted to drift off to sleep. I wasn't asleep yet, but it appeared that Mike was. I began to hear footsteps in the grass nearby, drawing closer to the tent. Suddenly, the zipper of the tent was pulled down, and I looked up to see my dad peering inside. He asked, "What are you all doing out here?" I responded to him with something along the lines of, "They wanted to spend the night out here, so we returned." Then I examined the face, peering into the tent more closely. I came to understand that it wasn't my father, but rather a total stranger who appeared to be around my dad's age. It seemed he was on the verge of entering when I let out a scream that echoed like a frightened child. As dawn broke, a chorus of voices erupted, with Mike's screams piercing through the morning stillness. The man seized our ankles and urged us to remain silent. But he soon relented when he understood that his cover was on the verge of being blown. He exited the tent and vanished. I urged my friends to dash into the house. And just as we were racing toward it, my dad emerged from the back door, responding to our frantic cries. I informed him that I was unsure of the direction he had taken, but that the man from earlier had returned. My dad dashed around the yard, yelling and challenging the creep to return if he had any guts. We caught the sound drifting in from the living room. My mom called the police, and when the officer arrived, he simply took my account of the situation. I'm sure he filed a report and then left. Having a police report was beneficial, ensuring that the authorities were informed about a suspicious individual in the area. I have my doubts about whether that man returned to our property or if he faced any consequences for something akin to that. Regardless, it was quite distressing, and the situation had the potential to escalate significantly. This occurred a few years ago, around 2019. I found myself at a friend's house, whom I'll refer to as M for the purpose of this narrative. I was really looking forward to this sleepover. I couldn't wait to dive into all the middle school drama. Now, something you might find interesting is that M's house was nestled deep within the woods. I mean really deep. Everywhere you turned, there were trees, and the closest neighbor lived roughly half a mile distant. However, at the rear of her home, a cliff descended toward the ocean. The evening at M's place began quite well, and our friend Sam was there as well. We engaged in truth or dare, hide and seek, and various other youthful games. As the evening wore on, we made the choice to stroll down the gravel road that meandered toward the neighboring houses. After consulting her mom, who gave her approval, we began our walk. After another 10 to 15 minutes, we spotted a man strolling on the opposite side of the street, making his way towards us. Initially, we didn't give it much thought. Perhaps this guy was simply out for an evening stroll too. However, there was something off about the situation. This man was dressed in rather heavy clothing. It seemed like snow gear, and to top it off, it was quite warm outside. At that moment, the temperature hovered around 60 degrees outside. As we walked by the guy, we exchanged glances, and that's when the realization struck us. The foul odor emanating from that individual was truly unbearable. The stench was beyond any description of disgust. It was so terrible that once we finally moved a few feet away, my friend inhaled deeply, as if she had been restraining her breath. One of my friends dashed into the woods and nearly lost their lunch. At this juncture, we believed it was most prudent to return. Our companion, who nearly lost their lunch, was pleading to return regardless. Everyone was in consensus that returning was the most sensible choice. As we made our way back, we encountered him once more. This time we held our breath as we passed him, but when we looked back, we realized he was no longer walking in the opposite direction. Instead, he was following us. This was truly bothersome. That repugnant-smelling man was now encroaching with his foul odor. We must accelerate our progress. We began to speed walk, with roughly a mile left to reach M's house. As we started to accelerate, So did the randomly unpleasant-smelling guy. We exchanged glances, a mix of fear and irritation evident on our faces. We increased our speed even further, nearly reaching a jog, but naturally, the man accelerated even more. At this moment, we found ourselves in a sprint, and my companion Sam glanced over his shoulder, and then we heard it. Sam let out a chilling scream as she glanced back, prompting him and me to turn around too, and what we witnessed, even now, fills me with dread. This man came charging at us, brandishing what appeared to be a knife or some sharp object in his hand. Sam, and I began to yell as we raced down the road. Our voices echoing in the air led him to cease pursuing us, and he ultimately just gave up. Yet he remained motionless, simply observing as we departed. We didn't linger to uncover his intentions. We simply dashed back to M's house. Upon our return, we shut the door firmly and made the choice to keep it from her parents, who were already in slumber. We all gathered in the living room to complete the arrangement of our sleeping spaces. A couple of hours went by, and it was around 2 a.m. now. We were viewing something. I can't recall the specifics, but I do remember it was a horror film. I've pointed out that her house was perched on a cliff for a specific purpose. As a result, her house features numerous windows on the backside that provide a stunning view. I found myself perched on one of the couches positioned directly by the window. The night was enveloped in darkness, with only the sound of the waves and the occasional whisper of the wind breaking the silence. Suddenly, I heard footsteps outside. They seemed to be right by the window. I mentioned to my friends that it was likely the deer that frequently visits. For 2 years now, Em had been nurturing this deer, who consistently approached this very window. I felt a surge of excitement, as this indicated that the deer would approach my hand directly. I chose to gaze out the window, but all I encountered was darkness. Nothing was visible. I suggested we go outside to pet the deer, but Em and Sam disagreed. They brought to my attention the events from earlier, and I concurred. We returned to watching the film. Another hour slipped by, and fatigue settled over us all. We switched off the television and nestled beneath our blankets. About 45 minutes later, Em and Sam were deep in slumber, yet I couldn't find any peace. Something was amiss. I felt an instinctive urge urging me to stay awake, so I chose to gaze outside. The moon cast a gentle glow, illuminating the ocean just enough for me to lose myself in its depths, so I lingered for a few moments, gazing out into the night. While I gazed outside, something in the woods to my left caught my eye, moving with a subtle grace. I glanced in that direction, yet there was nothing to be seen. I sensed movement, so I reached for a flashlight resting on the bookshelf, and I directed it toward the spot where I noticed the movement. Now, this was likely the worst idea I could have ever had, because when I did so, I saw that man again, but this time he didn't have any snow gear on. Instead, he stood there completely shirtless, and I had no intention of discovering what else he might be lacking. So I attempted to rouse Em and Sam to share what I had witnessed. Sam stirred from sleep, while Em remained lost in a deep slumber. I instructed Sam to gaze outside, yet when we turned our attention that way, he had vanished. Sam glared at me, her expression filled with frustration, as if I were deliberately provoking her. I assured her I wasn't, yet she remained unconvinced. She returned to bed, leaving me there, lying in solitude. The clock had just struck 4:30 in the early morning hours. Outside, the darkness lingered. I was wide awake the entire night. I found myself slipping into slumber when a knock echoed through the stillness of the night. I nearly leaped off the couch when I heard it. I was aware that I shouldn't open it, yet my curiosity overwhelmed me. I approached the door and peered through the peephole, only to find emptiness once more. My mind must have been toying with me. I returned to the couch and draped my blanket over my head once more. I finally drifted off, only to awaken at about 5 a.m., drenched in a cold sweat. Once more, something fell off. My body wouldn't cease trembling. Then it struck me. That recognizable odor. The odor is utterly repulsive. I nearly lost my lunch at that moment. But as quickly as I sat up, I heard footsteps approaching, and I screamed. I switched on the flashlight, and in that moment I caught sight of him, a figure from earlier positioned in the corner of the room. I let out a scream that jolted Em and Sam awake, and they screamed right back. As we proceeded, the man suddenly dashed out of the house. Em's parents rushed down the stairs, and after a few moments, we shared everything that had occurred. Em's mother contacted the authorities, while Em's father strolled down the road with a shotgun, searching for the man. Once the police arrived and gathered all our accounts, I headed home. My parents were rather quiet when I returned home. They embraced me for what seemed like an eternity. From that moment on, sleepovers were no longer an option for me. It is only now, after all these years, that I truly understand the extent of how dire everything was. The police ultimately discovered the man, and within that decrepit shed we had been challenging one another to enter lay 5 lifeless bodies. The odor emanating from that man's body was the unmistakable scent of rotting flesh. Had circumstances unfolded differently, my friends and I would have found ourselves in that shed in the end. I am employed in risk management at a major bank located in Manhattan. This job has introduced me to many fascinating individuals. I frequently head out to happy hour with my coworkers. In 2019, a new individual named Sebastian joined our office. I encountered him on his inaugural day at the office. He appeared quite friendly and engaging, often laughing and smiling. He joined us for happy hour that Friday, and he genuinely was the life of the party, constantly sharing his stories, recounting the various places he's visited and the adventures he's embarked upon. Every moment spent with him was filled with excitement. Over time, Sebastian and I developed a friendship, and we would occasionally go out together on weekends. As I got to know him better, I began to understand that much of what he said might have been made up. His tales of all these enchanting women he supposedly connected with. All these tales of spending time with famous personalities. I began to approach everything he said with a healthy dose of skepticism. However, I continued to spend time with him because he was simply enjoyable to be around and had a certain charm about him. One day, Sebastian invited me to join him and his sister at their condo in St. Pete Beach, Florida. His mother possesses considerable wealth, owning properties in Beverly Hills, Colorado, and St. Pete. She wouldn't be at the condo this particular weekend, so Sebastian thought it would be enjoyable. I invited my brother should join us as well. All of us boarded the same flight. I encountered Sebastian's sister at the airport. She appeared quite intriguing. It's difficult to articulate, yet she had a certain eccentric charm. The condo was surprisingly pleasant. It featured 3 bedrooms. I had never experienced a condo with 3 bedrooms before. Sebastian and his sister each took a room, leaving my brother Tyler and me to share one. I mentioned to him that if we encounter any girls, he'll be sleeping on the couch, no doubt about it. As we arrived late, the time for the beach had already passed. We visited a few beach bars that had a really great vibe. The audience leaned towards the more mature side. Sebastian was becoming quite inebriated at an alarming rate, though for some reason. The atmosphere was relaxed and easygoing. He couldn't quite understand the reason behind his decision to down shots. I needed to advise him to ease up when he began to act aggressively towards others. This was the first time I had encountered him in such a manner. He was approaching every single girl he encountered and, in a drunken haze, attempting to flirt with them. More often than not, the girl appeared to be uneasy. Tyler and I shared a laugh that lingered until the humor faded, leaving behind a sense of embarrassment in being seen together. At one moment, a larger individual confronted him for speaking to his girlfriend, and I had to intervene, pulling Sebastian away and offering an apology to the man to defuse the situation. As we walked away, Sebastian shoved me and insulted me for not supporting him. Tyler and I advised him to simply relax. Even his sister was advising him to take it easy. Sebastian stormed off, presumably heading back to the condo. His sister remained silent and simply trailed behind. This was a truly strange beginning to the weekend. Tyler and I lingered, savoring our drinks until the last drop. These girls approached us and inquired about how we knew him, turning it into a jest. We managed to get their numbers. They were visiting as well. They mentioned they would be heading downtown later if we wanted to meet up, and we agreed that we were in. After that, I sent a text to Sebastian inquiring about their whereabouts, and he replied right away that they returned to the condo. Tyler and I strolled back to the condo and let ourselves in. We anticipated Sebastian would be furious, but as soon as we entered, he leaped off he sat on the couch, brimming with excitement and a wide smile, asking, "Are we going out tonight or what?" He was undeniably quite inebriated. I suggested we take a moment to relax here before moving on. Then I shared with him the numbers of the girls we received. Sebastian inquired about the number of girls, and I replied with 2. His smile faded away. Then Tyler for some. The reason I mentioned was that the girls approached us after you left, inquiring about how we knew you. I believe he intended it as a joke, attempting to playfully tease him a little, but that turned out to be a misstep. Sebastian marched into his room, the door slamming shut behind him with a force that echoed his frustration. I was coming to the conclusion that he might be quite bipolar or something similar. I was sensing vibes now from both of them. I whispered to his sister, "Is he always this way?" And she responded, "Like what?" in a rather aloof manner. "Forget it," I remarked. This was profoundly unsettling. I was holding on to the hope that perhaps Sebastian would find clarity and that tomorrow would bring improvement. Tyler and I relaxed in our room for a bit. Sebastian never emerged. I approached the door and knocked, inquiring if he would like to join us outside. He remained silent. We finally took an Uber to meet those 2 girls at a large, lively bar. While as he continued to drink, Sebastian began inundating my phone with messages asking, "Where are you? How could you abandon me in this place? Your belongings are being placed in the street. Stay away. I'm uncertain about the reason I asked you to come here." I shared it with Tyler and the girls, and there was a palpable sense of concern among everyone. There was an unmistakable shift in Sebastian, and it was evident at this moment. Despite the enjoyable time we were sharing with the girls, we needed to take an Uber back to the condo before Sebastian truly made a foolish mistake. Upon our return, we found Sebastian seated on the couch, solitary, his gaze fixed on the wall. I inquired about his well-being. He glanced at me, then turned away and said, "Yeah, hope you had fun." He rose from his seat, made his way to his room, and closed the door behind him. It is what it is. We retired for the night. Tyler and I spent about half an hour engaged in conversation, discussing Sebastian and reflecting on life in general. Suddenly, footsteps echoed on the wooden floor outside. Our conversations came to an end. The footsteps approached the door, then fell silent. We both heard it. I quietly addressed Tyler on the top bunk, softly mentioning that Sebastian is just outside the door. He replied softly, "I understand." He must have been eavesdropping, straining to catch our words through the door. Not a single word was spoken. 5 minutes passed in silence before we finally heard his footsteps retreating from the door. Then we heard him speaking outside. He was laughing and talking, but we didn't catch his sister saying a word. I was curious about who he was conversing with. Quietly, I approached the door and gently pushed it open. I peered into the living room, shrouded in darkness, and there was Sebastian in the corner, leaning against the wall with one hand, his head bowed low. He was chuckling and conversing with himself. I heard him say, "Joe is always such a foolish person." Then he chuckled once more. "My name is Joe." I gently shut the door and returned to the bottom bunk. I confided in Tyler about what I had just witnessed. His response was just, "What the hell?" I suggested we depart tomorrow morning and book a hotel, and he concurred. We attempted to drift off to sleep, yet the chatter and laughter outside persisted for an additional 10 to 15 minutes. Once it ceased, we could hear the footsteps approaching the door once more. Pause for a moment, then proceed to his room. Then we heard the sound of his door closing. At last, we found ourselves at ease, ready to drift off into slumber. At this point, I had been shot. I drifted off to sleep rather swiftly. However, I found myself awake again after just about 20 minutes. I sat up, sensing that something had stirred me from my slumber. I gazed at the door, and before it stood Sebastian, poised and present. I leaped and exclaimed, "Hey, what are you up to?" He lunged at the bed, screaming attempting to strangle me, yelling, "You're a piece of shit." Tyler had to pull him away from me and toss him into the corner of the room. Sebastian shouted that you're terrible, Joe. I invited you here only for you to criticize my life and speak poorly about me to my sister. I certainly attempted to soothe him and bring some logic to the situation, but there was no reasoning with madness. We gathered our belongings and summoned an Uber to a hotel, where we remained until Sunday, then took a flight home. In the weeks that followed, I noticed Sebastian in the office, yet he consistently steered clear of engaging with me or even making eye contact. He ultimately moved to another office, likely due to my influence. Sebastian appeared calm and ordinary at first glance, yet he was a reflection of a deeply troubled and wounded individual beneath the surface. That night we spent in his condo filled me with absolute terror.